All right, so thank you everybody for joining us. Tara, maybe you just want to introduce the session quickly?
It's just to discuss the wage increase email that Harry sent out, I think about a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, saying that as per the agreement that's in place at the moment for 2020-2021, that there is a proposed wage increase scheduled for 1 July. And if we could get some feedback on that and what we're proposing as the coatings industry or the Surface Coatings Employees Association. So I know that a couple of companies have come back to us and given us their feedback in terms of applying for exemptions and what they're proposing going forward. But I think just to collate that information and send it all back to Harry with our proposal from one body, which I think I don't know if you would mind collating all of it and just putting it back in email to Harry as to what we are proposing.
All right, so guys, thank you. Thanks, Tara. So if I can just refer you to the screen, because this in fact is the negotiated agreement. As you can see, what you have agreed to is this, that for the period of 1st of July to 30th of June, 2021, the minimum wage of 7,573 Rand 80 would be increased to the average CPI, which by the way is 4.6%. I'm just looking now. It's 4.6% at the moment. To that minimum wage of 4.6% plus 1.5. So it's 6.1%. So you're basically what you're saying, 6.1 or 6.5%. So you've pegged it at 6.5%, irrespective of the fact that it would be 6.1%. You've basically said here that your average increase from the 1st of July 2020 is going to be 6.5%. And so the question is, and I, you might very well say, yes, our company is going to be applying for exemptions, but as a collective, as the 17 odd companies which are making up Surface Coating Association that signed this agreement, we want to talk strategy, bearing in mind that you also have an annual an annual bonus that you've agreed to pay of 4.33 weeks of actual basic wage in the course of the year. So frankly, the question we're being asked is, in this time of COVID, in this time of the junk status, the Moody's junk status rating, are you wanting to stick with this collectively, or in fact, are you wanting to instruct the employer confederation within the bargaining council to do something different? And that really is ultimately the question and the reason for us having this meeting. So guys, the floor is yours. Delane, I see you're there. Maybe you can give some other details based on the meetings that you've attended in terms of what you think generally the feedback should be or is going to be.
Hi all. Okay, so from the meetings that we've attended, I think they are the bargaining council is looking to us as employer associations to give feedback on this. They haven't really given any direction. I know there's concerns from Sandile, the lead negotiator, saying if we try to back down on this increase or try and freeze it until next year, this is probably going to put the relationship with the trade unions at risk and future multi-year agreements. So in terms of that, they've left it purely onto us to try and give some sort of a direction.
All right, so
there hasn't been...
Delane, I want to jump in here and I want to say something that's, I suppose, going to be controversial, but I'm going to say it nevertheless. The head of the employer negotiating body in the bargaining council has turned round at your meeting and said, guys, be very careful about disturbing the apple cart. Be very careful about upsetting the trade unions. Should you want in any way to vary this agreement, the trade unions might become upset. Now, that's the head of the employer negotiating team that is supposed to be acting in the best interest of employers. I find something, I don't know, unpalatable about that directive.
Yep, well, that's what he said.
Guys, ultimately, you're the employers at the end of the day. It's your signatures that's on this document. The reality is that this multi-year agreement was entered into last year in 2019. Circumstances are now completely different. And I suppose the question is this. If we hear that the majority of you are going to be applying for exemption, that you don't want to pay the 6.5%, then that, if anything more than, let's say, 40% of you don't want to pay the 6.5% increase, that surely has to be impacting then on the agreement that's been entered into and is a cause for this agreement to be renegotiated, given the two things, given COVID on the one hand and the economic downgrade of the country to junk status on the other. Or am I being unnecessarily antagonistic in my view?
Hi there, it's Greg Meeker here from DECRA. How are you doing? Can you hear me?
Hi, Greg, I can hear you. Sorry, I was just typing something. Yes, now I can hear you perfectly.
Sorry, I agree with you on all your points that you've raised there. First of all, the head negotiator, I'm 100% behind you on that one. We should not be backing down to unions in any form whatsoever. And in fact, nor should anybody in the country at this stage. We have an unprecedented situation here. It's not for the unions to start negotiating in any form whatsoever. So from my personal stance, I would say we immediately go back to them and say, we're not interested in the 6.5% increase whatsoever, and possibly even scrapping the bonus from my perspective.
Anybody else want to say anything?
Tracy Robinson from Decade Paints.
Hi, Tracy.
I agree with Greg 100%. We certainly, if the surface coatings don't do it as a whole, we will certainly be looking for exemption of both the increase and the bonus to try and survive.
Delane, I've got a question for you, and that is, what do you think the forecast could be? Bearing in mind you've been involved in the negotiation up until now, what do you think the forecast could be should the Surface Coating Association say to the Employer Confederation, we want this agreement renegotiated?
I don't think they'd go back to renegotiate.
Despite the fact that, there are intervening factors now that were not around at the time of the original negotiation.
True. Like I said, the basis was, I think they're concerned about the relationship with the union mainly at this stage. And therefore, the request is coming from us to individually, either as an employer, to request for the exemption, if not as a association wholly.
If you had to look strategically, ladies and gentlemen, I suppose one has to ask, what's the worst case scenario if the trade union is upset? Because if the trade union is upset, the potential then is for the trade union to engage in industrial action, which, by the way, during an economic slump and after COVID, might very well legitimately lead to a series of Section 189 processes and the trade union membership being neutralized in the process. Or am I being melodramatic about something that's likely to stabilize?
Yeah, Greg, sorry, I agree with you 100%.
You see, my concern is two things. My concern is that the trade unions have far too much power, and there's an imbalance of power at the bargaining council, number one. My concern, on the other hand, is that your negotiating team at the bargaining council are bending over backwards to appease the trade unions, so that consequently we have an agreement that directs 6.5%, where we know that the majority of you are going to be applying for exemptions, and therefore that agreement, at best, that the agreement doesn't stand. But worse, how many of you are they going to start turning down because they don't want to destabilize the agreement? So you apply for exemption and then they refuse exemption on the basis that it could destabilize the entire agreement. That is my concern.
Yeah, frankly, from my perspective anyway, it is time to literally rock the boat as such. The unions cannot have the power that they currently have. over us. We can't stand and sit by idly and let them control what our own businesses, especially in a time like this.
Greg, you know, I've got a more pressing concern, and that is the companies that I've spoken to within the Surface Coating Association are telling me that the base rates that have been negotiated, that you started working from and that have been increasing year on year by at least 6.5%, that those base rates mean that you have to be uncompetitive in the marketplace, particularly given the imports that are coming into the country, and that those base rates need to be negotiated downwards. Now, I know for a fact that the Employer Association, the Bargaining Council, are rejecting that in its entirety because of the fact that, you know, they've got this agreement with the trade union. But my feeling is that it should be back to the negotiating table to look first and foremost at the base rates and ask the question, can we afford what we were even paying last year, given the trading environment this year?
Yeah, it's a very good point. You know, if I look at some of the comparable salaries that guys that aren't part of the surface coating, what they're actually paying, we really are, we'll call it, overpaying our staff as such. Not that they're not worth it. That's not the point. It puts us in an uncompetitive environment.
Ivor, it's Mark here from.
Hello.
Ivor, it's Mark from TechniPay. Can you hear me?
Yes, of course I can. Yes, Mark.
Just two observations or some input, maybe on guiding principles here. And everything that has been said so far is just absolutely spot on and valid. But we must bear in mind that the temperature is just so high at the moment to have a discussion and make a definitive decision on things right now. Is there no merit, and I'm just thinking aloud and listening to yourselves here, is that there's got to be some form of consultation with the union on the fact that circumstances have changed so radically in the last 2 or 3 weeks that it requires a review of the current agreement, and that one has a meeting of minds with the union on it and try and map out the strategy and share some of these concerns we've raised and try and make it more of an informed discussion with the union and map out for them the consequences if we don't review the agreement or look at it, and maybe even get their input onto it. Because my experience is if they have their way and we can't amend the agreement, the logical consequences are going to be even more job losses, because I know companies are calculating the 6.5%, 7%, converting that into a number of jobs and saying, well, that's now worth another 10 or 12 jobs if I have to increase my payroll by that amount of money. So, and they're going to use the COVID situation as some sort of a 189 justification. So there might be some merit in a meeting of minds, high-level discussion with the union on these concerns we have when things are obviously the lockdown is lifted and we can engage on the issue. But I think it would be problematic and quite hostile to go to the union right now to say, listen, this agreement cannot fly under the circumstances. And if you don't listen to us, there's going to be a number of exemptions that's going to make this thing null and void. And your failure to entertain any exemptions is going to put the whole future of the Bargaining Council under risk. As we all know, the whole centralized bargaining thing is very flimsy at the moment. But anyway, just to conclude, my input is there no merit in having some high-level discussion with the negotiating team and the union to say, how do we progress this, rather than try and make decisions now in the heat of the moment. And that's just as I say, it's maybe more of a guiding principle on the way forward than a solution right now.
So, Mark, I think you're absolutely correct that there needs to be a multi-pronged approach to it. And certainly, as far as the employers are concerned, the feedback I imagine to the employers would be the need for an urgent forum to engage, basically, and that means to engage employer, it means trade union, and possibly even it also means, and I'm just using it as an example, but I'm talking about the CCMA as the intermediaries, as the moderators in the process. And I don't mean the CCMA, obviously, but I'm talking about some kind of neutral moderation that can get them around the table talking. Because ultimately, as things stand at the moment, the employer association itself is not open to wanting to do anything other than simply engage on the substance of these increases, as opposed to the merit of renegotiating the entire agreement. And I wouldn't necessarily disagree with you, Mark, that now's not the time to do it. However, I do think a new forum needs to be created to basically put everything on the table.
Absolutely, and it's just to get them onto the same page. And even as you say, if it's with neutral facilitation, I understand where the lead negotiator is coming from, and I'm involved in some other negotiations too. And often the negotiators put a higher value on the relationship and the harmony in the bargaining process than the impact it has on companies, and that's why it's often so difficult to get a mandate and a common mandate. At the end of the day, it's trying to ensure there's some sort of a amicable outcome, and for the negotiators, that relationship is absolutely, holy. But for the rest of us in business, we've got to finance those increases, and we're having great difficulty with that at the moment. And our view is get the union to understand that there have been an extraordinary change in circumstances. We've mapped out some solutions and options, but we'd like to consult with you on it before we do so. But at the end of the day, I agree with some of the other input here. We then as companies are going to have to exercise our rights to apply for exemptions and decide where we go. And that's a pity, because if the union does handle this recklessly, that is just another nail in the coffin of centralized bargaining. And as it is already, the Chemical Bargaining Council is flimsy. And we've got to do everything we can to actually turn it into a success story. And if the unions are going to cling on to agreement and say, well, irrespective of the market conditions, we're going to hold you to this agreement, I can tell you now there's going to be huge consequences. But the feedback I've gotten speaking to my people is there's more of a concern, and I think it was touched on here, in terms of the bonus, year-end bonus. It is an absolute fact that there is not a single company at the moment that is even considering paying year-end bonuses, and whether they're contractual, whether it's established practice, or whether it's a bargaining council arrangement, so at the very, very least, the bonus thing is not going to fly. We need to put in a mechanism so that the unions and the employees can be advised of the fact that bonuses are not going to be paid. And everyone's got to decide how to deal with the increase. Is it back to the drawing board, or is it the current CPI? Is it a reduction by 50%, or is it no increases? In many big organizations at the moment, they are talking about salary cuts, let alone a wage increase at the moment. That's how serious things are. But my experience with unions is it's not what you say, it's how you go about it, and creating a forum in terms of information sharing and look at options, but keep our powder dry on what actions we can take if it's not going to work out. And I think we've got the month of May, heaven forbid that the lockdown get extended, but that we can then engage with them at a very high level in terms of how are we going to deal with this year's cost of employment, because it cannot be what has been negotiated. Just as simple as that.
So the thing also with this, and that is that what the employer negotiators are saying is that this is a multi-year agreement, and we run the risk of losing the benefit of the multi-year agreement if we agitate the trade unions. Now, the reality, I think, is that circumstances themselves are saying that if it's necessary to go back to a year-by-year negotiation, at least until the stabilization, both of the economy as well as the health state of the country and the world is concerned, that might in fact not be such a bad thing, because things change so quickly, as we've seen in the last year, that a multi-year agreement might come back and bite employers at the end of the day. The risk you take, of course, if you do something like that, is that what you've negotiated at 6.5% this year might very well end up being 10% next year if the unions want to dig their heels in. And what you've got is a certain amount of guarantee over a 3-year period because they've agreed to it, or a 2-year period because they've agreed to it. So it really is a risk, and it's about risk management in the process. But what I'm hearing from many employers is that this is unsustainable levels, both of base rates as well as increase rates. And the bonuses, as you've said, Mark, are just not on the table for this year, irrespective of the response that the Bargaining Council gives.
Yeah, and the other, just on multi-year agreements, and it's become quite fashionable, but the general experience is employers pay quite a premium in year one to get a multi-year agreement, and the employees sell it on the basis that there's going to be industry stability for the next 2 or 3 years, but to sell it to members, we need to pay a premium. So even the multi-year agreement does come at a price, but there's got to be some checks and balances built into the agreement, that if there's unforeseen circumstances like this, it is unbelievable. And we are going to be spending the best part of our year locked in 189 discussions, and by being reckless about the wage increase this year, it's going to certainly compound that situation. And therefore, the need to get the union to understand that we need to review this. What are the consequences if we don't do it? And get a high-level discussion going with them, I think, as soon as possible. And that we all keep our powder dry on the way forward, where we go from here. Because if this is not handled responsibly, this is my other fear. It's just like so many other bargaining councils. I see this, just signaling the end of not only this particular bargaining council, but just centralized bargaining per se.
So there are two issues that come to mind from what you've said, Mark. The one issue is that in any kind of engagement, no matter how benign it's going to be, that what the trade unions are going to ask for is as many moratoriums that they can get. For example, moratoriums on 189, moratoriums on retrenchment in exchange for concessions, which is normal bargaining tactic, but certainly cannot be considered to be bargaining tactic in these times. So that's the first point I wanted to raise, is that one needs at some stage to say, what is our stance going to be on any kind of moratorium whatsoever? And then the second is, of course, the notion that if the trade unions show absolute resistance to any kind of engagement or renegotiation whatsoever, the notion that the Surface Coating Association has the freedom at this stage, because there hasn't yet been an extension, but it's on the cards from the Minister of Labour, has the option of, in fact, pulling out of the bargaining council altogether and looking at bilateral arrangements with those trade unions in an alternative forum. If it does get too much, if it becomes too expensive, if a 17 company organization has no weight whatsoever on that employer caucus, the idea and the notion of pulling out of that bargaining council and reestablishing some kind of a forum for engagement isn't necessarily a bad thing at times like this.
Yeah, I see that happening. If there's got to be a stage strategy from the employer's side, by sharing with the unions first why it is unaffordable and why there's got to be some sort of a employment cost management strategy going forward, and why this increase and the bonus cannot be entertained this year. Our first obligation is to try and keep this economy and the jobs as stable as possible. But if they don't comply with this, then we have no choice to look at some other radical options, and one of them is to actually withdraw from the bargaining council per se. If the cost of employment, because of the association of the bargaining council, is so expensive and it's putting our businesses at risk, then we want to withdraw from the bargaining council and operate at a sectoral level. But we cannot be at the mercy of the unions. Because there's an agreement, we've got to be held to it and put ourselves at risk. I think there's going to be a lot of bargaining around the issue, and they're going to try and seek all of those moratoriums. And I don't think, and it's quite a cavalier statement to make, but the days of unions, and certainly from a national perspective, being able to engage in industrial action and go and strike because of the picket rules, and so it's going to make it really, really difficult. I don't think their members have an appetite for strike. So they're going to put up a really brave fight. But I think at the end of the day, they might then make some concessions, certainly on this year's increase. But for me, at the very least, the message that the bonuses cannot be paid this year and not leave it to individual companies to have to apply, that battle's got to be won. It's as simple as that. And that's just following a national business experience throughout the country at the moment. And as I say, in many companies, they're going to consult with staff on salary reductions. So I'm very surprised that our union's going to go to war on trying to hold out for an increase. But therefore, the need to engage with them at a high level to say, listen, guys, it cannot be business as usual. We cannot live this agreement in its current form. And we've got to find some sort of a solution in terms of mitigating the employment costs going forward. And most of our companies and the associates I speak to are all high-density employment companies. So the cost of employment is significant. And what we want to try and avoid at this stage is retrenchments, because that in itself comes with an unnecessary cost. We've got some very long-serving employees. That retrenchment cost is going to be unbearable. So we'd like to try and find a solution. And if it's just to limit the increase in employment costs, that's for us as first prize.
Mark, I'm with you on that one. I agree on all your sentiments. Who essentially, you're talking on the high level, and I'm with you on that one. Who would be doing that negotiating with the unions, and essentially, when could it take place? I think that's the question that we need to ask here.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we, maybe as Ira pointed out, there's a structure within which we negotiate at the moment with our negotiating team. And I think, 2 or 3 of us, 2 or 3 of yourselves, Ira needs to engage with the lead negotiator just to say we need a very high level union meeting with a strong surface coating flavor or representativity attached to it to engage on this particular issue. But what would help our cause too is to find out what the other sectors are saying at the moment. Do they share the same views? Do we go and have a sectoral type discussion with the union on it, or is it a unified approach from all the sectors to say we cannot live the current agreement in its current form? Let's have a discussion.
Can we just ask Delane for feedback in that? Because Delane, you sit on those multi-chamber discussions. What are the other sectors saying about it, the other industries?
Hi, I'm just trying to think back. On the discussions on email, there hasn't been much that's been shared by the other sectors. So no, I'm just going to have to go back and have a look to see if there's anything that I can share. But at the top of my head, there hasn't been anything else. As far as I know, everyone is just wanting to comply.
It's maybe because they haven't applied their minds, but it would be valuable to have that discussion with them, Delane, and just to get their views on it, and maybe share what this sector's thoughts are, because it is just so absolutely extraordinary what lies ahead for us at the moment, and that we be proactive. And I think with unions, it is to try and get there sooner rather than later. The other defense is going to be, well, why did you leave it so late until you started talking to us about it? And, so it would be valuable to get that information, in my view, and to ideally first prize is some sort of a united front. Otherwise, the unions are very naughty with a divide and rule strategy. If the other sectors are saying, no, it's fine, we're going to say, well, what's wrong with your sector? What makes you so different from the other?
Hi, Ivo.
Yes,
Hi.
Delane. Yes.
Hello.
Yes, Delane.
It's Lungi. It's
hello.
Lungi.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good, thanks. Hi, everyone. So just maybe to give a little bit of input, the negotiating team is actually going to be sitting down with the unions anytime between this month and next month to look at the second part of the agreement of the talking specifically to the July implementation. And I would think that would then be an opportunity for us as a sector to put forward a united view, because if I remember correctly, who sits on this, like all the other sectors that sit on this particular negotiation, we are the worst hit out of all of them. And obviously we cannot be then taking whatever stance they are putting on the table. We need to sort of like have our own very strong proposal coming forward as to what are we going to do with the July 1st implementation, because that's what they're going. And I think maybe if we spend most of our time in this meeting, putting our proposal as already put forward by Mark and Greg as to how to deal with the July implementation, specifically to the 2 items that have already been identified. That is the 6.5 increment and the annual bonus that talks to this year.
Well, that's comforting to know that there is a common platform, and it could be used as an opportunity for a discussion with the union and get some sort of a meeting of minds on how to deal with this. And then coming out of that, the union's got to come up with some proposals. If they don't, we're going to, and there's basically three options. The one is no increase. The one is 50% increase. Obviously, the one that we completely dismissed now is a full increase. And the alternative is a split increase. One now and one in January. If trading conditions have improved, there might be some retrenchment. So that increase is going to be on a lower cost base because there's going to be less employees. That in itself is an option. But we can get very creative going forward on this. I think what we need to do is get the union on the same page to understand that it requires review, and how do we go about it, and what the consequences are of them saying no to it, and then how we're going to deal with it. Because I think Ivan's point is a very valid one. If en masse there's going to be exemptions, it's just going to again bring into question the viability of this bargaining council and its ability to even contemplate extending agreements going forward. And I think for the union, keeping this bargaining council alive under very trying circumstances in itself strategically important for them. Maybe they see the big picture here.
All right. So I think that in short, I think that we need to have a short and a medium-term objective. The short-term objective is to go back to Gerrie, Tara, and I'm happy to prepare the report back to Gerrie, which basically says, look, there has to be a staying of the current increase and bonus requirements of this agreement, which could be revisited next year. But there has to be a negotiated stance on staying these increases and these bonuses simply because of the two factors, which are number one, COVID, and number two, the current state of the economy. And number three, the fact that 90% of our members are currently either involved in or considering 189 processes. So what we'd like is for the Employer Association to strategically argue for a staying of the implementation of an increase this year and bonuses, number one, potentially pushing the multi-year agreement out by a year. And simply because of intervening circumstances, that might be the best short-term solution to buy some time. And that's to push the multi-year agreement out by a year, to stay any increases or bonuses this year with a view to having that additional year on the other side to try and get this multi-year agreement to work properly. That's the short term, I would imagine. The medium term is to say that either through the Employer Association or alternatively, in attempts for the SCA to enter into a bilateral discussion. Number one, bilateral discussion with representatives of the other employer representatives in each of the substructures of the bargaining council. And number two, thereafter, the notion of a bilateral forum, even if it's an informal forum, of sit down between those representatives of the employer constituency on the one hand and representatives of the trade union constituency on the other, to try and knock out some kind of an intervening agreement that could then impact on the bargaining council itself. So I would imagine that that's a short and a medium term strategy, which is worth pursuing.
I fully support that. That is really nice thinking. That's a level-headed approach, Ivan. From my side, I fully support that, and well summarized.
Thanks, Mark. All right. So unless anybody wants to take strong exception to that, that's then the route that we think we'll go. Mark and Greg, if I can ask you to sort of have a discussion with Tara and myself, look at the document we put together for Gerrie, and then get it on to everybody else on the committee for final approval before we get it off to Gerrie. I would really appreciate that, because I think we're all on the same page at the moment.
Yeah, no problem.
All right, guys, are you? Yes, sorry. Yes, Tara.
Sorry, just in terms of that strategy that you're going to put going forward, are you going to do that report on behalf of Lungi, who's the chairperson of the association? And then, I mean, obviously, if Lungi, are you going to be doing, if they do still want to meet before the renegotiation of the agreement going forward, in that meeting that you had mentioned earlier in your chat just now, would you be doing those negotiations going forward, or would Delane be sitting on those negotiations?
I think my approach would be, Tara, let the team, Ivo, and everybody gets involved with it, and then Delane and myself, because I sat on last year's wage negotiations, So what I can do is that I can just touch base with Gerrie just to see if I can invite Delane to support, you know, our view during I think it's next week's meeting, if I'm not mistaken. I'm not sure if it's next week or the week after. Yeah. So
Because
I don't see any harm in Delane being part of that meeting.
I know that in the past, when Delane had to go to a meeting, I think it was in January or February, early February, she couldn't go in. So we asked if Ivor could attend that meeting and on behalf of the Employees Association, and he was denied access. So I'm not sure. I mean, I think Ivor is quite prepared to attend meetings and to sit there and be there to support either yourself or Delane going forward. But we just need to understand from Gerrie, does he need to be nominated from the members of the Employees Association, and then we would have to ask members to just send us letters to support either assisting or sitting in on those negotiating meetings with you or Delane, or how we do it going forward, because I know that in the past you and Delane felt that you maybe needed more support from the other members within the Employees Association instead of it all just landing on your shoulders with in terms of the negotiations.
Yeah, no, so yeah, like let's check. I really don't see a problem, and if it would benefit our association that instead of me going, then we ask Ivor to represent the association, and then I withdraw. That I'm also open to that discussion.
All right, so guys, I think maybe what we should do is short term, we want the report and the proposal to Gerrie for the short and the medium term objectives. And then basically between Lunga, Delane and Tara to try and sort out with Gerrie how we're going to deal with the issue of representation so that we are properly represented. What Gerrie's response previously is that there are no professional negotiators or no association representatives in these forums. It is only employers, which I can fully understand and appreciate. But also I think that they didn't want the apple cart upset in terms of the homeostasis that's been developed as well, which again, I can also understand from a bargaining point of view. So, I think we need to be sensitive to the fact that what the employers are saying, it's taken a long time to get here, and we shouldn't come in and try to destabilize this very good relationship they have with trade unions. Whereas from our point of view, what we're saying is that good relationship is in fact costing us money and costing our members money. And that first and foremost, we're here to try and do the best we can for our members.
No, I certainly support you there. And even if somebody like yourself is available in and assist Lungi and Delane and the team, and even Lungi not to have to step back for you to be there. We don't want to lose any institutional knowledge here at the moment, but I do believe that we need to man up with a smart team. And maybe the voice of business needs to be more directly heard, given what's going on at the moment. The negotiators, great, but they don't feel the pain. It's the employers that feel the pain, and it might just require just literally playing as a good old rugby analogy, play some people off the reserve bench at the moment just to man up on the team. I just think it's going to require skillful people, and I'd really welcome you participating in such a process.
Well, that's what I'm here for.
I'm 100% with you. Yeah.
All right, excellent. Guys, thank you. We'll start putting documents together, and then Mark and Greg and Tara and Lungi we'll get together telephonically, and we'll try and take this thing over the next week into some kind of fruition.
Okay.
Thank you. Appreciate everybody's time. Thank you so much, guys.
Okay, thanks,
Thank
team.
you,
Yes. Okay, bye.
Take care.